The F-4E Phantom II flies out for both the USA and Israel in War Thunder. Let's check it out. The F-4 Phantom II was originally developed as a fighter for the U.S. Navy in the late 1950s into the early 1960s. There was an initiative to adopt a common fighter across the different branches of the U.S. military that was being pushed by the leadership at the Defense Department, which led to the Navy's F-4 being evaluated against the Air Force's F-106. For a variety of reasons, the F-104 was chosen for standardization, and the Air Force did a crash program to establish its own set of requirements for the plane. This led to the first U.S. Air Force F-4 Phantom II taking to the air in 1963, famously breaking Mach 2 on its first flight. The F-4E, which was an upgraded model of the plane, included a built-in M61 Vulcan cannon, which was lacking from earlier models, compatibility with a wider range of weapons, a different radar set, improved engines, and, starting in 1973, they included leading-edge slats on the wings. Over 1,300 F-4Es were built, representing the vast majority of the entire production run. The U.S. Air Force used the plane extensively, including in combat service over Vietnam, where it scored a fair number of kills. Now, the plane was also a pretty popular export fighter and saw service with a variety of nations, including Israel. The first Israeli F-4Es were delivered in 1969 under the Peace Echo program and provided the IAF with a significant boost in performance. The new planes were pressed into combat service almost immediately, and the IAF scored its first air-to-air kill with the F-4 in November of 1969. The introduction of the F-4E into the Israeli Air Force caused some major tactical and strategic changes for its adversaries, and it went on to shoot down over 100 enemy aircraft, as well as serving as the basis for the F-4E Kernas upgrade program, which was a heavily upgraded version that flew for Israel until 2004. What we're looking at in War Thunder are two versions of the F-4E. A jet fighter in rank 7 with a battle rating of 11.0, available in both the American and Israeli tech trees. The aircraft are mostly similar but have some minor differences. The F-4E carries the AN/APQ-120 radar set. This is a fairly capable system with an ACM boresight mode, a good selection of range presets, and two different scanning angles. Notably, this radar lacks a look-down mode, and it's pretty susceptible to ground clutter. The F-4E also gets a radar warning receiver and a full ballistics computer for all of its weapons. The primary gun of the F-4E is the M61 Vulcan cannon. This is, quite simply, an excellent weapon with a reasonable supply of ammunition. The loadouts are slightly different between the American and Israeli F-4E versions, with the Israeli model having slightly more loadout presets, while the American model gets a slightly better variety of weapons. Both planes can carry external gun pods, and the usual selection of dumb bombs and rocket pods. For air-to-air missiles, both versions start off with the basic AIM-9E. This is a simple, uncaged seeker rear aspect heat-seeking missile, but at top tier, its performance isn't especially competitive. The US Phantom upgrades to the AIM-9J, while the Israeli Phantom gets the AIM-9P. The AIM-9P is an export version of the AIM-9J, and in the game they're almost identical, and both of them provide the F-4E with a very respectable close-in dogfight weapon. Both planes also get the AIM-7E Sparrow semi-active radar homing missile. This is a medium-performance all-aspect weapon, and while you're grinding upgrades for the plane, this'll probably end up getting you quite a few kills. The top-end air-to-air missile for the F-4E is the dogfight version of the AIM-7 E-2 Sparrow. Now, on paper, these look almost identical to the basic AIM-7E based on the stat card, but the rocket motor has slightly higher thrust, and its seeker starts tracking a full second faster, which is actually a significant upgrade and makes the weapon a lot more useful at closer ranges. Switch to these as soon as you can get them. For air-to-ground weapons, the American F-4E can take the AGM-12C Bullpup manually guided air-to-ground missile. By the time you get to the F-4E, you've probably seen the, AGM-12C by now, and it's the same basic manual command line-of-sight weapon that the earlier American planes get. Both versions can also take the AGM-65B, which is a TV-guided anti-tank missile with pretty solid performance. This isn't a lot of use in air battles, but flying close air support, these can be effective and have reasonably long range. Both F-4Es also get the AGM-62A Walleye TV-guided glide bomb. While this doesn't have the range of the Maverick, it can be used in attacks from high altitude to track specific targets and deliver its warhead with basically pinpoint accuracy. These things are great. Now, the big dog for both planes, though, is the GBU-15. This is a huge 2,000-pound TV-guided bomb, which can accurately place its enormous warhead on stationary or moving targets. Its blast radius is big enough to clear entire objective points in ground battles if you can get lucky with a bunch of tanks clustered together. The flight performance of the F-4E is great in some areas, kind of average in others. The defining characteristic of the F-4E is power. This thing has enormously powerful engines, with great acceleration and an impressive top speed, even at low altitude. The plane's climb performance is similarly strong, and if you don't take a full fuel load, all of this gets even better. If you really want to maximize performance on anything but the enduring confrontation maps, a 20-minute load is probably going to be your sweet spot for fuel. As a further boost, the F-4E is the only F-4 Phantom currently in War Thunder that has the Agile Eagle upgrade package, which gives it a small but noticeable advantage in overall maneuverability compared to other versions of the F-4. Now, don't get the wrong idea. Dedicated turn fighters can still get the jump on this thing in a sustained dogfight most of the time, but its performance is still better than other versions of the F-4. The F-4E can safely drop its combat flaps up to around 600 kilometers an hour, which can also give it that tiny little extra boost when you need it. Just be aware there's an energy cost for that extra performance. Flying the F-4E into air battles is a lot of fun. Despite not having a look-down radar set, this plane can still be very competitive if you're careful with your tactics. The plane has a huge load of weapons, and you can take slightly less optimal shots with your missiles without needing to worry quite as much about wasting shots. Most of the time, you're not going to get 8 kills when you fly out in top tier, so you don't always need to expect 1 kill per shot. And if I'm being honest, sometimes I fire off a Sparrow at a guy just to force them into a maneuver and bleed off some energy so that I can get myself into a better position for the actual kill shot. Now, since the plane doesn't have a pulse Doppler radar, you'll end up using the ACM boresight mode for the majority of your actual combat, and at lower levels, it's really the only way to lock targets with this plane. The real key to success, in my opinion anyway, is to try and avoid fighting in the furball and deny your opponents the opportunity to gang up on you. This happened to me in a lot of the footage I'm showing, which forces much more defensive flying, which bleeds more energy, and makes literally everything more difficult. If you don't defeat your opponents quickly when you're being ganged up on, you will eventually lose to the guy who's chasing you, and there's really no way around it. Eventually, it's gonna happen. I had far better luck when I attacked people flying off on their own, or when I used the F-4E's speed advantage to make an attack pass and then basically just run until I had range to get into a good position again, but that can be a pretty tedious tactic, and it really doesn't make for interesting gameplay footage. The F-4E can also be really fun to use as close air support. Its selection of guided weapons is pretty reasonable, and my personal preference with this plane is to use the GBU-15 in a dive from high altitudes, but it can still work fine with the Mavericks and the Walleyes. Visually, the F-4E, well, it's an F-4 Phantom. It's got a very edgy look to it that tends to be pretty polarizing. People usually love it or hate it. The American version gets a few pretty good-looking custom paint jobs, including the awesome Thunderbird skin, while the Israeli one only gets a single camo pattern, but hey, at least it's a good-looking one. Landing the F-4E isn't too difficult, but just remember that this is a heavy plane, so you'll probably need to keep your throttle a little higher on final approach than you might be used to. It's got a decent braking chute and an arrestor hook that you're almost never going to get to use. Overall, pretty basic landing performance. The cockpit of the F-4E has good instruments and decent forward visibility, but no visible radar warning receiver and absolutely no view backwards. You get a radar B-scope in a great position though, so that's good at least. Overall, pretty basic Phantom cockpit, and it's fun to fly this in VR. To close out on the F-4E, this plane has an enormous weapon load, with great multi-role potential, and it's well suited to a variety of different gameplay styles. It's the most maneuverable of the F4 versions, and it's got really good engine performance. Plus, you have 90 countermeasure slots. However, its performance goes into the toilet if you actually take one of those big, heavy, multi-role weapon loadouts. Smaller and lighter fighters can still out-dogfight it, and it doesn't have a look-down radar set. The final verdict on the F-4E is that this plane is still quite competitive in the meta, and provides the American and Israeli tech trees with a good, high-tier multi-role heavy fighter. Using it effectively is a bit different from most other high-tier fighters, but if you practice and get good with this thing, it's going to be a really fun grinder for you. As always, thanks for watching.